Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for The Lodge. And what The Lodge is essentially about is we center on the character of Grace. She is this woman that is basically engaged to be married to this man who has two children that are suffering this very difficult loss, and because of that, they are very closed with, they're very adamant on not letting Grace in. They don't really want much to do with her. But basically, the family always takes this trip around the holidays to this ski lodge. However, the father, because of work and things like that, isn't going to be able to make it this time around. So he decides that it's going to be the perfect opportunity for Grace to basically bond with the kids some more, show how, willing she is to be their new stepmom and things like that, and hopefully forge some sort of a bond. However, once they are in the lodge, it's pretty clear that there's a lot of paranoia and secrets that are unraveling, and very quickly these characters start to go down a far darker path than they planned to, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, The Lodge overall, I was very excited for this film. I remember I saw the trailer for this many times last year, and each time I did, it just seemed like it was going to be one of the most thrilling and eerie experiences of the entire year, and also it being from the director of Goodnight Mommy, a movie that I found very terrifying and really got under my skin. I was really hoping for The Lodge to be a solid, to really deliver in that way. And especially considering just how shitty of a year this has been so far for horror films. I mean, there really hasn't been a single good one. Even ones that weren't bad, like Gretel and Hansel or Underwater, still weren't good. They're just very mediocre. So I was really holding on to the hope that this could be the first good horror film of the year. And I will say this, The Lodge is definitely one of the most foreboding, one of the most creepy films that I've seen in a while that absolutely did get under my skin, but I do not think it's quite as good as I wanted it to be. It's still a good film, don't get me wrong, but there are a couple, there are quite a few things that do bring it down. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And look, in terms of things this movie does well, the cast is absolutely one of them. Every single actor here is fantastic. Every single actor here is really giving it their all. However, absolutely, the thing that holds this entire film together, and I don't think would be as good without it, is the stunning performance from Riley Keough in this movie as the character of Grace, who blew me away. And look, I've seen her in stuff before, like The Girlfriend Experience and Logan Lucky, and It Comes at Night. She always delivers for me. She's always been a really great actress, but the level that she goes here is absolutely insane. She goes all in on this performance because Grace is someone who does have a very traumatic past, and obviously I'm not going to get into it because of spoilers and things like that, but there's a lot that is very much troubling her, and she is trying to kind of escape it all. She's trying to use this family as a way to leave that all behind, as a way to start anew, but you see how that really does start to catch up to her, and especially in the third act. I mean, Keough just completely kills it in this role. You really get sucked into this character. You really are utterly terrified of this character at points for where she ends up going, and I think she just did such an amazing job in this movie. She absolutely is the best thing about this film, without any doubt. I think she absolutely killed it here, and look, like I said, I've loved her before, but I really do think this is her finest work yet, and the movie is worth seeing alone just for her unhinged and very relentless performance here. I mean, she really didn't hold anything back, and I cannot commend her enough for that. However, I also really do have to give credit to the two kids in this movie, both Jaeden Martell, who, I've really loved him in a lot of films before. He's always been a great actor for me, but especially Leah McHugh, who really impressed me in this movie. I thought did a really good job as these two kids. They do a really good job of getting you to understand them, getting you to, sympathize with their plight, and it kind of reminded me, some of their acting reminded me very much of acting in like Ari Aster films, where none of the anguish and the pain that these characters are going through feels like a movie. It feels very real, almost eeringly so. There's a scene with Leah McHugh very early on that was a startling reminder of that. It gave me major vibes of like Hereditary and things like that. Just the way that she was acting. She absolutely killed it in this film. I haven't really seen her in much of anything before, but out of the two child performances, I thought she did a much better job. And then Jaeden Martell, the best thing I can say about him is that he is basically playing whatever Finn Wolfhard was trying to do in The Turning and does a much better job at it. Because it is kind of similar to that role, except here it's just far more convincing. Like here it's much better than whatever the hell he was trying to do in that movie. And so I think they both did a really excellent job here. Richard Armitage is also really good here, even though he's not in the movie that much. Alicia Silverstone also does a really good job. Everyone in the movie, acting-wise, is fantastic. I really have no complaints in that department whatsoever. I think everyone just did a fantastic job here. Something else that I definitely do not have any complaints with is the directing. I think the directing is fantastic here. And that is the one thing I will absolutely give this film. Both Veronika, Franz, and Severin, Fiala, who again are the same team of Goodnight Mommy, basically did the same thing they were able to do so well in that movie. They give this film a sense of eeriness. They make you feel very uncomfortable. I, throughout multiple points in this movie, was definitely getting very creeped out. In terms of horror, the film absolutely delivered. Goodnight Mommy definitely had that as well, but I think they were able to apply that even further here. This film, almost throughout this entire thing, is very, very hard to watch. It's very emotional. It's incredibly depressing, and I think that they maintain that tone perfectly throughout. There was never a moment in this movie where it felt like they were forcing it. There was never a moment in this movie where it felt like, okay, that they're taking it, you know, they're not going as far as they can with it. No, it really did feel they went to their fullest potential in terms of the directing, and I absolutely loved what they did there, and I think they did a really great job with that. Where things get a little more muddled for me is in the screenplay, which I'll just say right now, there are a lot of things I really do like here. I'll get to the things I like right away. The character of Grace, our lead character, I think is excellent. I love everything about this character. Like I said, she has a very traumatic past. There's a lot that she's been through. In fact, very early on in the movie, the kids find out, you know, significant information about her that is in itself very creepy to think about, and what she's going through, and the way she's kind of like conflicted throughout the movie, because she wants to be a good mother to these kids, but at the same time they clearly want nothing to do with her. Every chance they get, they shove her away. Every chance they get, they just make her life a living hell. They don't want anything to do with this character. They're just at a point where they are fed up with the fact that she's going to be their mother. And so even though she's trying to do that, you know, she tries to maintain this sense of sweetness to her, this kindness to her, and you really do feel bad for her, but at the same time, you also are terrified because of the past that she has, which throughout the movie is very much haunting her. Realize that she has kind of walked away from that, and now it's coming back to haunt her, and I don't want to spoil how exactly that happens, but where that character ends up going made complete sense to me. I thought her transformation was perfect in this movie. I don't think you could have handled that character any better than they did in this movie. I was very impressed with the way that character was handled. I thought she was so well written in that way, and I thought the film did an excellent job with that. The central story itself, I also think, is really good. Having these three characters, which it really is just the three of them. Like, yes, Richard Armitage is there in the beginning and towards the end, but it mainly is these three characters, and it's a very riveting story in that way. And again, I can't spoil too much of what's going on here because there's a huge spoiler in literally the first, like, 10 minutes of this movie. And if you find out what happens, I think it lessens a lot of what goes down. I think if you know going in what's happened, other than the kids are suffering something very traumatic that's happened, and they haven't really been able to recover from that, and because of that, they are very unwelcoming towards Grace. That's really all I can say. I don't want to say what actually happens, but That notwithstanding, I think it's a really solid setup because we've seen this story before, but what they do with it here is they're playing it in a far more realistic manner. This is not a comedy. This is not one of those like family comedies you'd see in like the 2000s where the kids are doing everything they can to get rid of Grace. Instead, they just don't really want anything to do with her. In that sense. They just are very rude towards her. They really are very, they very much turn away from her. I thought that that whole setup was really good because you can see throughout the movie, these three characters are becoming more and more miserable as things go on, and you really do feel just as trapped with them. And I'll get more into that with the cinematography and things like that, but they do a really good job with the screenplay. And for the first two acts, I was all into what they were doing. I thought that the setup was really strong, especially when it comes to the character of Mia. Leah McHugh's character, I think, is really well handled. You see that she holds this connection to this doll, and she's someone who is very much in touch with her faith. It means a lot to her. She is very paranoid about a certain event that has occurred. She keeps talking about it constantly, and so because of that, she is very scared throughout a lot of this movie. You can tell that she is not in a very good headspace, and so it makes sense why she bonds with the character of Grace a little bit more than her brother does, because what's happened in the family is just affecting her a lot more. And I really ended up liking this character quite a bit. I think Mia is a very solid character. I think where they ended up taking her, at first I was definitely on board with. And Mia as a character really represents a lot of what the film is trying to say. The film has a lot to say about the way people process grief, way people process, certain deadly situations that they're in. The idea of claustrophobia, that's a big part of this movie. The idea of someone who is very conflicted with their faith, that's a big theme here. There's a lot of really deeper themes that I think this film latches onto very well, and I think that definitely is very strong here, and there's a lot that I really do like about it. So what really does fall flat for me is really just the way this film decides to go about things. Because, again, and I'm trying to skirt around spoilers as best as I can here, really without spoiling anything. For a while, my biggest problem with this movie is that I thought they were revealing what's going on way too early. There's something that occurs in literally the first act of the movie, and I was like, I like this, but I kind of wish this happened later on. I would have liked to see more of the central premise of the film, because there is a pretty big shift that happens, I want to say like 30 or 40 minutes in. Like, it's very early on into this movie, and I liked the idea, but I didn't like that it was happening so early on, and I didn't like that they were revealing what was going on so early, but I was very much on board with where it was going, because the film I did find to be very riveting. I did find to be very much into it. Like I said, scare-wise, it definitely worked for me. I was very much into the film. I don't really think there was a point where this film ever dragged for me. And then, where they end up going in the third act, I just didn't really buy. Certain character choices and things like that, it just didn't really make a lot of sense for me for them to go in this direction. I just did not find it to be all that plausible. I had a very hard time trying to figure out what the movie was trying to say there. And I just don't think I really like the way they handled it. It came off as way more random than I think it should have been. And I'm not saying like this was something that they shouldn't have done. I think there was a way to execute this, but I just don't think the execution was as strong as it could be. And it did contradict some characters' previous decisions in my head. So that's where I do think the film does fall a bit flat, is in that third act overall. And I think they could have done a better job with that for sure. But again, in terms of cinematography, this film absolutely delivers. The snowy landscape, the constant, the constant snow that's falling, you really do feel trapped there. Imagery is something this movie handles very well, because a lot of the movie is very bleak, and not just in its tone, in its setting as well. There's not a lot of color in this movie. It's very dark, it's very ominous, and it gives you a very visceral feeling. You really do feel like you're there with them, and I think it makes the movie feel a lot more intimate, and in turn makes it feel a lot more scary in that way. And it kind of reminds me of The Lighthouse last year, where the imagery is one of the things that really made that film, I think, as terrifying as it was. And I would say very much the same of The Lodge. I think they did a really good job with that here, and that's something that I was overall very impressed by. I really liked the way that was done, for sure. And the score as well, I thought was also very effective. It's not played a lot, but whenever it was, I thought that it was a very effective score. I thought that it perfectly, showcased the anguish that these characters were in, what they're going through. I thought they did a really good job with that. Also, I will say, I know a lot of people have been comparing this film to Hereditary, and yes, there are definitely some comparisons there, but this film is not at all trying to rip off Hereditary. In fact, the directors have said, like, they didn't even know Hereditary was a thing when they were making this movie. They just both coincidentally involve dollhouses and things like that, and they have far different meanings as well. Like, yes, there's a lot of dollhouses in this movie, and yes, similar to Hereditary, there's a lot of like dioramas and things like that that tell the story of what's going on, but they're doing it in a much different way here. They're utilizing it in a much different avenue. They're trying to get at something much different than Hereditary was, and so I don't really think that's a problem at all. The editing, I will say, I do think this movie should have been a little bit longer. If it was 2 hours long, I think it would have been a bit more satisfying. The beginning of the film for me definitely did feel a bit too rushed. There are some things that go down that I would have wanted to see more of. The event that the characters are going through, even though you sympathize with them and you understand it, you don't feel as much of a connection because we haven't seen as much as we would have wanted to, so I think they could have done a better job with that. And I do think that the third act was incredibly rushed, and that's, like I said, really my biggest issue with this movie is just the way the third act wraps up. It's not very satisfying. It's not really the kind of ending that I walked away and I was like, okay, I'm fine with the way that ended. I honestly don't really like the way this movie ended. It felt very abrupt to me, and I think they could have done a better job with wrapping things up overall. The only other flaw I really do have is Jaeden Martell's character. Without really saying anything, the character of Mia, there's so much depth given to her, and Grace as well, that the character that Martell is playing, I just did not find to be nearly as interesting. I think that Aiden, as a character, there's definitely some layers to him they could have dived into, but he doesn't really have that much going on as a character, and so I think they could have done a better job with that overall. Overall, though, it does not take away from the fact that I do think The Lodge was very effective. It definitely creeped me out. It definitely got under my skin. It's definitely a film that delivers on that front. I think there's some very good imagery. I think that the themes are very well utilized here. Riley Keough and Leah McHugh are fantastic in this movie. Riley Keough especially is enough of a reason to watch this film. It definitely has some very effective scares. I think it definitely has some of the best location that I've seen all year, and just the fact that I can say that this movie was even good, in my mind, is a compliment. I think the fact that this movie did succeed, and the fact that horror movies have been really bad recently, the fact that this one's actually good, I'm very, very happy about. It continues the streak that Neon is on. I really like where Neon is headed as a distributor. They're really going in a very A24 type direction, and I hope they continue to put out more stuff like this, because smaller horror films, this is where it's at right now. This is what I want to see more of. Less of stuff like Fantasy Island and The Turning. Like, I don't want that kind of stuff. This is much more in the vein of what I want to see. And so on that front, it did overall deliver. And though while I do think some elements of this film can be very clunky at times, at the end of the day, I can say that I did really enjoy what I got out of The Lodge. And so I am going to give it overall a B-. But overall, guys, in my review of The Lodge, let me know what you guys saw this movie overall, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.